disasters like fires, floods, and earthquakes.
Thank you. Rob, we also have Eduardo Hernandez, who is available to translate into Spanish, and we have that available for the Spanish speaking participants on the call. Rob, I'll let you start with Tetra Tech.
Yeah, good afternoon. Rob Flainer. I'm the Hazard Mitigation Program Manager for Tetra Tech, and Tetra Tech has been very fortunate to be supporting Sonoma County on this effort, and I am the project manager. And on my team with us today is Cindy Raleigh, who you will be hearing as she's presenting a lot of the material, and Bart Spencer, who is the lead project planner, helping us facilitate all the process. So we look forward to talking with you all tonight.
Okay, let's get started. I am going to hand the controls over to Tetra Tech, who the county has hired as the consultant leading our hazard mitigation planning process. Tetra Tech will explain first what a hazard mitigation plan is, the history, how we're moving forward, and then we'll move on to the first phase of our analysis, which is looking at the risks countywide. This multi-jurisdiction process is new for Sonoma County, and I will allow Rob to explain that process in more detail as I monitor and allow people to join the meeting. Thank you all for coming, by the way. I know it's a beautiful day outside, and I appreciate your attendance.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So yes, this is a hazard mitigation plan, and it has a very specific purpose. Hazard mitigation plans are, while we're coming up on a 20th year of them being around, it is still a pretty new concept. They are driven by federal legislation that requires that these plans exist to be eligible for funding that happens after disasters happen. And a lot of you may have heard terms like presidential disaster declaration or whatnot. What these plans do is they act as the key way to federal funding that could be made available by the federal government, either post-disaster or pre-disaster. So there's two pots of money that this plan will act as a key way to. The law's been around since 2000, and the first round of planning started happening in 2003, 2005. This is the third update for Sonoma County. The very first plan that Sonoma County did was covered by a regional plan sponsored by the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG. And then the second subsequent update, these plans are, just so you know, they're required to be updated every 5 years. FEMA wants them to be dynamic, living, breathing documents. So the second update was a single jurisdictional effort that just focused on the unincorporated areas of the county. And that was done in, I believe, 2015. And then this update is changing the scope and the scale of the plan, and we'll talk more about that as we get in later in the presentation, but it is what we call a multi-jurisdictional plan, which means it's covering more than one entity. It's not just covering the county, but it's covering cities and special purpose districts. So it's a very important document. The law that we're adhering to requires these plans be conducted and developed in an open public process. And so we've made every attempt to do so. We have steering committee, websites, and you're going to see a lot of tools today about what we're creating to continue the access to this document. So without further ado, I'd like to transfer the baton on to Cindy Raleigh, who is one of our key team members who has created the platform for communicating a lot of this. And this platform is a tool. And there's a lot of information about why and how and what we've done under this process contained in this tool. So Cindy will be going over what we call a story map, and she'll tell you what that means and how that pertains to this process. So Cindy, would you like to take it from here?
So Cindy, I think I need to stop sharing, and then you should be able to share. Apologies for any Cindy, you are now able to share the story map.
Right. I'm going to switch some things around.
There we go.
with me. I'm going to try to get my Zoom on one screen. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. Much better. Okay. How's that? Is that working well? Everybody can see my screen?
I'm not seeing
I
a screen
just
yet.
see.
Yeah, I just see you. I saw
Oh.
the screen for a moment. There it is.
There it is.
Hey,
There it is.
There it is. All right.
Technology. Yay.
Technology.
Thank you.
I think it's because I didn't hit share. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm glad you guys are having a beautiful day there. I'm in the Midwest, so anything that's above -24 from the last 2 weeks is a welcome. And so what I'm going to do, Rob alluded a little bit about what we've done to communicate out the hazard mitigation plan update process. And so we developed this story map platform that's a public platform. It's a work in progress, and you'll have access to the link. So you're going to be able to go through and navigate and read through everything. And
El condado de Sonoma. Es una herramienta que involucra información geoespacial y muchos diferentes tipos de datos. Y esto se va a poder accesar vía.
Walk through, what the plan update process is and everything. And I think the plan is that I'll go ahead and walk through everything, and then we've got plenty of time to take questions at the end. So if people have questions about how to use it, questions about the content, anything, then we've got opportunity to have that open forum questions. All right, so real quick, I am going to try to make my screen full screen. It's not doing it, so I'll just keep sharing. Okay, so this is the landing page. And this is what you see when you'll click on the link. We've got here an email. This is as you go through and you have any questions, come back to the home page and you can click on this and I'll take an email. I do want to just give a little bit of forewarning. When you do access the link to the story map, right now it's set up for desktop or laptop viewing, and as we proceed and get the plan, the story map updated, we'll be converting it to make sure it's accessible via mobile and tablet as well. So if you do try to access the link on your phone, it's not going to work so well just yet. All right, so we'll dive in. Lisa talked about mitigation. Rob talked about mitigations. That hazard mitigation plans have been around for 20 years. But it is a word that's thrown around a lot, and sometimes often, there's a lot of different meanings to it. But if we want to get on the same page and understand, what is mitigation? Mitigation is not doing a risk reduction project after a disaster. And a lot of times, sometimes that's how the funding mechanisms are set up, but that's not the intention of a hazard mitigation plan. The intention of a hazard mitigation plan is to identify projects and actions that can be implemented continuously, not just after a disaster, not just before a disaster, but on a continuous basis. And that's no easy feat by any means, because what that takes is, it really is a whole community effort. It talks about plan integration across different county jurisdictions. It talks about, nonprofit organizations working with the private sector, working with the public sector. So really, when we think through a hazard mitigation plan, it's not just a plan that has to be updated every 5 years. It is a living, breathing document that is continuously implemented every day. Real quick then, just talk about some of the higher benefits of mitigation. So what we'll do today, that's one of our intentions of talking through the story map, is to be able to communicate out the hazards that were assessed as part of this plan update, and hopefully be able to communicate and improve understanding of the risks and vulnerabilities associated with the hazards. Mitigation, some of the benefits are that they're cross-cutting. They address things such as conservation and preservation and water quality and pollution reduction. So while you've got some projects that will address coastal resilience, it might also help address watershed management up the road. And then, of course, one of the biggest benefits of mitigation is to reduce the negative impact of natural hazards. So in this image that you see, we've got a house being elevated from stormwater. And ultimately, the biggest goal of any type of mitigation plan or resilience project is to build strong, self-sufficient communities. So the best thing that we can possibly do is share this information, provide the tools, and be able to bring people together to work on mitigation projects, like I said, in a sustained manner. And real quick, the mitigation example that we wanted to highlight, some of you may know about this project and it may be new to others, but in 2020, Permit Sonoma received a large grant under the FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program to address wildfire risk. So this is a good example of saying, okay, so what is a mitigation project that we might put in this mitigation plan? So this is a really good example of one. And once you're able to navigate this tool, you can go and click on this link and find more about SoCo Adapt. And before we dive in too much, just wanted to talk about the different roles. And by no means, this slide does not represent, only that there's 3 roles in your involvement in a mitigation plan. And I imagine most of you wear multiple hats. You could be a county resident, work for a government agency, and also support a nonprofit sector. So all of these different roles might apply to you. But one of the biggest things we want to identify is that as a county resident, the more you're involved in the hazard mitigation plan process, the more influence that you'll have in identifying the mitigation projects that will best serve your community. And so that's one of the things to say, part of this, like Rob alluded earlier, to say that the plan update process is meant for public input. And ways that you can be a part is obviously, thank you all for coming to this meeting. That's, one of the best ways. But other ways is to, once you're able to access this tool, you're able to share it with others and communicate that. And there's other planning meetings as part of this plan update process that you can participate in. And as a government agency role, one of the best things you can do is identify, excuse my train in the background. One of the best things you can do is identify different cross-cutting projects, so different agencies might be doing, culvert update, and that might benefit a different agency. So I think the biggest thing is to identify, okay, we've got these mitigation projects identified in a mitigation plan. Are they also in this plan? Are they also in other plans? So really that integration and coordination point is pretty key for government agencies. And then private and nonprofit sector, I think, the meat of the matter is the best thing we can do is to communicate out different type of grant opportunities and project opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities out there that are applicable to the private and nonprofit sector that could be working, in coordination with the public sector as well. So that's what we hope to be able to share, what some of those resources are, and then avenues to get involved in the process. So this page just provides a couple links. There's still an ongoing hazard survey that was initiated as part of the beginning of the plan update. So that link to the hazard survey is still live. The purpose of that survey is to understand the perception of risk, understand people's interests and concerns as related to hazard mitigation and hazard risk. This link will take you directly to the link to the meeting calendar on Permit Sonoma's website, and then this will just take you to Permit Sonoma's website. So it's just a little one-stop shop. This resource page is what I talked about earlier a little bit. This page will continue to get updated as we go through the plan update process. This is just some real preliminary links, but you can go here if you want to find specific to FEMA grant funding. You can find out about the Hazard Mitigation Assistance grant funding, and then the new grant program that FEMA just rolled out called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, the Flood Mitigation Assistance, and of course, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So I did want to talk that the Hazard Mitigation Plan is not just FEMA-centric. It is something that is mandated by Department of Homeland Security, and then it's approved by FEMA Region 9, your hazard mitigation plan. But certainly the opportunities for mitigation projects can be funded by many different entities, NOAA and USDA and NRCS and the Nature Conservancy even. But there's also opportunities for private sector investment too. So we'll continue to provide resources for the strengthening your community. All right, so Rob already talked about why is the plan being updated. Well, it is required to be updated every 5 years to be eligible for the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant. So we've also got a link here if you want to access the 2016 Hazard Mitigation Plan to get yourself familiar with what was done 5 years ago, and then you'll be able to provide input upon this new plan update. One of the biggest changes, so here is what's different with the 2021 plan. I think the most significant change is that in 2016, it was a single jurisdiction plan. It was just for unincorporated Sonoma County. And the 2021 plan update is a multi-jurisdictional plan. And what that means is each participating planning partner will have their own annex in this multi-hazard mitigation plan. So each participating partner will be identifying and ranking the hazards within that district, and then identifying mitigation projects specific to the different hazard rankings. And we've been able to hopefully boil down the data in a way that can communicate that as I go through this, the story map. And you'll be able to see some of that information associated with very specific jurisdictions. And the other key element, I mean, all hazards are reviewed and identified. Is there best available data? Has data been updated? And if it has, then that gets updated in the plan update. And one specific plan that's being integrated with the Hazard Mitigation Plan update is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So you'll see some preliminary data as we present the data and as we go through the presentation. But that is something that's very specific to Sonoma County and is being undertaken in parallel process. All right, and I'll just go down. So the planning partners, what I talked about a little bit before. So this map shows you who is participating in the plan update. So you're able to go through and you can look at the legend and you can see who are the planning partners. And it's an interactive map. You can search and link, etc. But this just gives you an overview of everybody that's listed here. Will have their own annex in the plan update. And then Lisa introduced part of the team, but really, updating a hazard mitigation plan is a pretty big lift. So there's a core planning team established that does all the, the background work. So all the logistics and the setup and the coordination and collaboration across different agencies and driving the input and helping coordinate then the steering committee. So the steering committee is a setup of an advisory body. And the advisory body helps, it brings in people from, different agencies, as you'll see here, whether they're nonprofit, or private sector, or a public agency. And it's really people identifying and giving input as the plan is being updated. All right, so the process. So the process began in last May. It's scheduled to be completed in 2021. We've got 8 phases listed here, which is a pretty standard process, but it's not necessarily sequential. It's a lot of the phases go in parallel with each other. So I can't say, hey, we're exactly in phase 4. So we are presenting the results of the risk assessment today. The phase 3 public involvement strategy continues for the life of the project. I am going to talk about the goals and objectives that the steering committee has worked to identify for the plan update. Mitigation actions will come, and I'll talk about what that means as we go through the process. There will be a plan maintenance strategy. So the plan lives on. Like I said, it's a living document. It doesn't just get developed and go sit on a shelf. The plan gets put together and we get your input. So this is the first of 2 public meetings. And again, the intention of today's public meeting is really to give you an update on the plan update process, but more so to provide the information on the hazard data and what it means and how that's going to help identify mitigation projects, the actions when we talk about phase 4. Okay, and so down here too, if you have access to this, we just provide another link to the calendar so you can see what's going on with the plan update process. All right, real quick overview. So the steering committee, what they do is they meet at least once a month and they get together. And the very first accomplishment the steering committee did was identify what is our mission. What's the mission of the 2021 plan update for Sonoma County? And the mission statement is to create a resilient Sonoma County for the whole community. Pretty concise, pretty clear. And then it follows up with goals, and my apologies for the small text. There's a lot of goals. So when hopefully it's your own laptop device, you can read this a little easier than looking at the screen. But You'll see there's a list of goals that have been established to support the mission. And then subsequently, there's a list of objectives. This is a linear process, so it's not goal one, objective one. It's more how many objectives can support the mission. And then when we identify, so we've got the mission, we've got the goals, we've got the objectives, and then we identify, okay, let's look at our risks, let's look at our hazards, and then what are our mitigation projects? And you identify those, but then you have to come back and say, are they meeting our objectives? Are they meeting our goals? Is it supporting our mission? So it's a constant cross-check as the plan is being updated. All right, I'm gonna take a quick break. Eduardo, I hope I'm talking slow enough. My apologies if I'm going a little fast. So I am going to slow down a little bit and talk you through what you're looking at here. So where we are in the process is identifying the hazards of concern. So what you see on this list is the hazards that can be quantified with modeled risk data. And again, we can ask, if I speak out of turn, we can raise hands and I can clarify any questions or any answers. So what you see on the left-hand side of this page is we've got a listing of hazard exposure, hazard ranking, and then we have a listing of each hazard. And we started out by wanting to be able to, you all to see the results of the data. So this dashboard is set up, and it's an interactive dashboard. It's set up to, you're able to come to this tab, and you're able to click on the map and be able to see. Sorry, sometimes it gets a little sticky with my map updates, but it'll come. So you're able to click on the map, and you're able to click the district, and then you're able to click the different hazards. So right now we've got the first supervisorial district with dam failure. And what you see over here on these indicators is to say, okay, for that hazard, for dam failure, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, there are 147 structures that are exposed to this hazard. And you can come over here and you can click on the hazard layer, so you can see the hazard layer. When it loads. All right, it's just taking a little minute. Okay, I'll keep going while it loads. I think the zoom sometimes slows down the transmittal. Oh, there it is. All right. I'm also going to click on, let's see. Not wanting to. All right, I'll come back to that. My apologies. Okay. So you've got dam failure combined, and then you've got your first supervisorial district. So again, you've got 147 structures exposed to this hazard in this district. You've got $214 million is your replacement cost value, and this data comes directly from the county's assessor data associated with those structures. So the total population in that district exposed to dam failure is 392. And then the percent of that population is 1.1, so pretty small percentage. So as you can see, what you can go down and you can see, you can go like, we can pick Sonoma County as a whole, and we can pick a different hazard. So, I'm going to skip earthquake because everybody in Sonoma County is exposed to earthquake. Let me choose, I'm going to do wildfire high relative. So if you choose all of Sonoma County, and then I'm going to change my hazard layer from the dam inundation to, let's see, to the wildfire index. Again, this might take a little bit to load, and when you're on your own system, it'll load much quicker than us doing this virtual share. And so what you'll see is, there's almost 5,000 structures exposed across Sonoma County to the high wildfire hazard. The replacement cost value is is 18 billion. Total population, and the percent is only 1.7%. And so as we scroll down here as well, this gives you an overview. So if I'm going too fast or you're not following quickly, when you're able to access this, you can come and read the directions a little bit. But this is really the intention of this is to say, okay, these are our major indicators of identifying impacts to property, people, and life. And so that's why you see these 4 different indicators across to try to convey the impact of exposure from the different hazards. I'm going to move on to the next page. And so what the next page does is take the same exact data and just present it in just a little bit of a different way. So my map's behaving on this one. It's nice. So what this is showing you is you can choose a district or a city. So you can come down and say, okay, I want to look at Cloverdale. All right. And I want to look at Cloverdale and I want to see how the hazards rank across my city. Like, so earthquake is my highest exposure of hazards. And then landslide susceptibility and go down to moderate wildfire. And you can come and you can also, as you look through this, you can click on the hazard layers equating to those different ones to get an understanding. And you can also use this little tool right here, if you're able to see my screen. You can use that to pop out your screen so you can actually really dive in and look at the data and really understand. So you could come in and load your layers. And then this tool as well, I'm sorry, again, it's going to take a minute to load. And here you see it's got this little boundary of Cloverdale up there. And then this tool will give you the legend. So this will say this is what you're looking at. So you can see, so if there's an earthquake and you've got susceptibility to liquefaction, these are the areas of the different scales of impact from susceptibility, from liquefaction susceptibility, sorry. And then you can pop back your screen to see everything over here. So again, you can go through the different tabs to see, you know, your ranking will stay the same, but it'll just give you some of the different values across the board to say, okay, so in Cloverdale, you know, we're almost at 2.5 billion for earthquake exposure, and then goes down. And you know, the value of this data is, one is first just to grasp, okay, so what is exposed? But then the next step is to say, okay, what do we need to do about it? And you know, what's our most concern? So like, is our biggest concern where our population's most exposed? You know, and then you can take this and obviously overlay it on different data layers. You can look at, you know, where do we have some of our, you know, populations that might not have access to, you know, to transportation. We might have populations that, you know, might need extra support, and identify, you know, are we identifying the right projects in these population areas that are really exposed to these hazards? All right, so that's just a really fast overview. And again, I can take some time and go through this information a little bit more. And just to emphasize again, you know, this is using best available data. Some of the data, like I indicated at the beginning, the wildfire data from the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, that is preliminary and is currently being under review by peer review. So the information's all here, but the data will not be final until the plan is actually submitted and adopted. And then when you're able to go here, you know, this is the final information. Okay, so what you can also do on this page is you can go down each of the different hazards, and each of the hazards identify, okay, this is the source of the data that you're looking at. This is where it comes from. This is what it means. And then as we can, we provide links so you can go find additional information. So similar to the other tools, this tool is dynamic, so you can click on and off the different layers. You could zoom in and out. And you know, if there's potential to, you know, eventually as we continue to build this out, you know, you could add your own layers to it and be able to look at different layers, et cetera, on this. So there's a lot of different applications. So the earthquake data will go through similar. There was 4 scenarios that were analyzed for the data results that we saw when we looked at the hazard exposure dashboards. And so you're able to click on each of those different scenarios. We've also got the liquefaction susceptibility. And then as you look at this data and you understand, okay, so, you know, let's just click on one of these. And the extent is obviously much bigger than outside of Sonoma County, but it gives you an understanding of the shake map. So when you look at the different values, you know, you've got, you know, I'm sure a lot of folks are very familiar with the Mercalli Index, but you've got your different ranges from light to severe, and then you're able to come, if you wanted to more information, you could come click on this chart, and it'll give you the information about what each of them mean. Okay, and then again, we provided a link where you can go and you can find more information about where the source data came from and what it means. All right, and sea level rise. So 2 different scenarios we use for sea level rise. One is using 200 centimeters of rise with no storm, and the other is 200 centimeters of rise with a 100-year storm. So if we just click off the extent, the sea level rise with no storm has a little bit of a higher extent than, or a little bit of a less of an extent than the sea level rise. So they overlap just a little bit. So you're able to zoom in and out and be able to see, you know, where it affects you and how it might affect you on those levels. Okay, and again, we've got links to finding further information, and then the different, the data citations as well, if anybody needs that for research or, you know, to be able to integrate into your planning processes. So landslide data. So we've got different levels here. We've got, you know, the landslide levels are from no to very high levels. And also you're able to, if you wanted to like just see the city limits, you know, within the hazard boundaries, you're able to click in and zoom in and out and find. And I think some of the feedback we're hoping to find is, you know, if you find this interactive tool helpful, would there be other layers that would be helpful to you, be able to be in and view and understand your hazards and your data? So that's some of the feedback that would be helpful to get from you all as well. We've got the flood information, the flood hazard, and there's a long description here of describing which each of the hazard data sets are, but what you'll see is the 1% annual chance, and I didn't leave the layers turned on because it gets a little busy, but you're able to go in here and turn. So this is the layer that reflects the current effective digital flood insurance rate map. Sorry, got a little tongue tied. And so you're able to come in here, and then you can come down and you can see the 100 year is the 1% annual chance, and the 500 year is the 0.2% annual chance. So then you're able to come in here and get a little closer to see, okay, so where is, you know, the storm that most likely will affect me, and then where's that big whopper storm that's, you know, sometimes they say it's a 1,000-year storm or whatever, but be able to see the extent of the 500-year storm. And there's information too here about being able to go and learn more about what the different flood layers are and what they mean, and where you can access your information, whether you're in a floodplain or not in a floodplain. Okay.
Cindy, can I
Yes.
ask you a quick,
Mhm.
I'm getting a number of questions, and I was wondering if this could be a logical place where we could do a bit of Q&A before we move forward, because some of them relate to the hazard mapping you're doing.
Sure.
So Bo Laurent asked if there's a way to search for address.
Yes, and I will just jump ahead. I think
Oh, is that ahead? Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
The questions were starting to come in, and maybe I will follow my own agenda and wait till the end.
No, that's great. Actually, will you ask the person who asked that to give me an address, and I'll show her how to, or he or she,
Okay.
how to enter it. So as we're waiting for that address, so I think, you know, we can go backwards if we need to look at the hazards, but what this last page is a hazard mapping tool. So this allows you to search directly for an address or location. You can draw a polygon, et cetera, and I'm going to show you how to do all that. And then you can create a property-specific hazard report from that. And so I'll walk through that, and then I will add, there's a few disclaimers I need to add on the hazard report.
So Bo did provide an address, 485 Horn Avenue, Santa Rosa.
485, I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
485 Horn, H-O-R-N Avenue in Santa Rosa.
Okay. All right, so it's going to zoom in. And then what you did, so you can go in there and you can turn on all your different hazard layers, similar to all the other tools you've seen. The different hazard layers are here, so you can turn them on and off as you want. I'm not going to turn any on right now because we don't need it for the hazard report. So the purpose of having the hazard layers here, so you can see it, you can overlay it, you can look at your property, but you can still print a hazard report or create a hazard report without any layers turned on. So I just wanted to point on the left-hand side, we've got really brief instructions, super brief instructions to kind of walk you through how to access these different tools down on this bottom toolbar. But we have further, I don't know, fairly extent, but we have it more detailed instructions when you click on this, and I'll show you. And it's actually a PDF, so you could print it, you could have it on your second screen or whatnot as you navigate. Okay. So that being said, I'm coming down here. This is our toolbar. So, you know, first we've got our legends that would show us, okay, these are, we don't have any layers turned on, so it's not showing me any legends. And then we've got our layer list again, where you're able to zoom in and out, or I mean, click in and on and off hazards. And sometimes here, if you see like there's a layer, but it's not showing up, it's because the extent is too big. So I'll show you how to navigate that too. Okay, so that's our layer list. Now this screening tool, this is where we really are getting to the meat of the matter. Okay, so I'm going to put that address in the screening tool. I thought I copied and pasted. Okay. Okay, so we already knew where it was, if it got it. So that's that's it, right? It's identified a spot, you put your location in, and then you just come down and you hit this button that doesn't fully say hazard report, but the pop-up does. So you see, okay, I want a hazard report. And so what it's doing is it just thinks a little bit, is saying, okay, so it's going through all our hazard data and it's spitting back to say, okay, you're within the hazard area for this earthquake scenario, all 4 earthquake scenarios. And so if it's got a 1, it tells you you're within that hazard layer. If it's got a 0, you're not in that hazard layer. So now I'm going to go hit print. So you can either hit download and save it to your computer, or you can print and just print a report. And here it takes just a minute to summarize everything, because it'll print you a little map as well. If you have the hazard layer selected, it will print the hazard layer so you can see the overlays too. So it comes down here and it gives you a summary. So it just basically says, if it's got a count of 1, it says that's affirmative, yes, you're in this hazard zone. If it's got a 0, you're not in there. And then it goes and provides further detail for each hazard. So then it says, for each of the earthquake scenarios, what Mercalli index zone you're in. So again, referring back to that index of, is it light, is it very light, is the shaking very light, is it heavy, etc. And so, and then I did want to say earlier, 2 of the things that we are working through is trying to incorporate the hazard data for the landslides and the wildfire in the hazard analysis report. So currently, that's not part of the analysis. It's due to the type of files and the tool itself. So, so now you'll get everything but wildfire and landslides for your hazard report.
But
Okay,
that will be coming, right?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That will be coming. It's not being left out just because wildfire is such a critical thing. I just want to highlight that's an evolution of the mapping.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop and wait for any questions before I show further functionality of the tool. If anybody's got questions before I just show how else you could look for things.
So I did want to chime in really quick. So we're getting a lot of questions about the interactive maps, and everything's live on the county website that you're seeing. So if you're experiencing technical difficulties, that could be an option. But I did just want to point out that everything you're seeing in front of you right now is fully live on the county website. I will put the link again in the chat of where to find it. But I did just want to point that out.
Okay. Okay, great.
I'll go through some of the questions really quick. Not that, answers don't require, longer time, but will this process include critically reevaluating the definitions of these hazards? Rob or someone from Tetra Tech, do you want to speak to that question?
Yeah, I can. You know, we're obligated to use best available data and science under this plan, and that's what we're using. And in some cases, like the wildfire data, it's literally brand new. I mean, it's still going through peer review, and the reason why we're using new wildfire data is because the county decided that the state level or the federal level data on wildfire risk wasn't sufficient. So it's really not the job of the mitigation plan to redefine or recategorize risk. We are working under the fundamental definition of risk as probability times impact people, property, economy, and environment. And so, you know, the categories of risk, you know, it's like the 100-year floodplain or the 1% annual chance floodplain. Our sources of that data are what FEMA has mapped, and we do understand that FEMA hasn't mapped everything. I know there was one question in here about I'm not in a flood zone, and it's because my, you know, my drainage isn't adequately maintained or whatever reason. We understand that those types of situations occur, but if we don't have a map that delineates that, we can't assess it. And so that's where we want feedback from you, where if there is an area that's not at risk, at least we can put a point on there and identify that for further study, further analysis, so that we can understand why is it flooding in an area. One of the elements of this plan is what we call a repetitive loss analysis, where we actually look at areas that have had repetitive flood claims. And when we start looking at claims, we notice a lot of those claims are outside the floodplain. And so that can tell us a lot, but unfortunately, there's not a model that shows the depth and the velocity of the water in that area or whatever. So that makes our ability to assess that risk limited. So, you know, there's a reason why these plans get updated every 5 years. We hope that there's always new data and science that can better inform them. And I can tell you there's a drastically improved risk data for this plan versus what was used in the 2016 plan. And I can almost guarantee you in 5 years when this plan has to be updated again, there will be even better data. And so, you know, this plan will be dynamic. And that's one of the reasons why we're creating this tool as a way to keep it dynamic, so that as new data comes available, the county will have the ability to update at least the risk communication tool. And so that's a roundabout answer to no, we're not going to redefine some of the categories that we're utilizing as best available data. You know, we're not going to redefine the 100-year probabilistic flood. We're not going to redefine the, you know, 100-year probabilistic earthquake, or even things like the high fire severity. Now, I will tell you, the fire data has redefined it over what the state of California has. And there's different parameters, there's different layers of analysis, and that is what's being peer reviewed and vetted right now. And it's pretty progressive. I will tell you, it's state of the art. It's taking the best technology that we have to try to assess it.
There is a question: how do you forecast climate change disasters?
Moving target and a sliding scale. We are going to attempt to do that. I mean, obviously things like sea level rise. We have very robust data sets. Part of the problem with sea level rise is we almost have too much data. We have adapting to rising tides, our coast, our future, USGS. You know, there's probably at least a dozen data sources on sea level rise. What we don't have is really good data on how's the hydrograph changing, and how do we model a floodplain based on that changing hydrograph. We do know that it's, you know, raining harder and longer in areas. But the problem is the way modeling is set up uses a historic hydrograph. And so the technology is not advanced at this point to where we can actually slide the bar on the hydrograph to change a flood dynamic or whatnot. So those assessments have to be qualitative. In other words, we know that flood risk will get worse, and we can guess, you know, will the 500-year today be the 100-year in 20 years? We can guess on that, and you know, that's why we're mapping the 500-year floodplain, because we know it's bigger than the 100, and that, you know, that risk could be, you know, as we see, you know, the things go forward. So it's not an exact science for all hazards. Some of the hazards like sea level rise, we have really good data, and for those we try to use that data. wildfire and sitting there and trying to predict what the wildfire risk will look like in 30, 50, 60, 100 years. We can guess because we know things like hydrographs are changing and vegetation patterns could change, but it's not an exact science. So we have to try to pick, the within this 5-year window. Keep in mind the performance period for this plan is 5 years. So in essence, we're really trying to set the table for 5 years of risk reduction. And then we move to that next transition point, which is the next 5 years. And once again, I'll go back to in 5 years from now, we know we're going to have way better data than we have now. And all we can do is set the table for, enhancing that analysis as it becomes available. But we do the best we can with climate change. We know it's very important. It's real. The climate is changing and it's impacting these hazards. But the ability to accurately measure and quantify that is not set in stone.
There's a question about including local knowledge in terms of projects and programs and the mitigation plan, or whether or not actions have to be tied to best available data.
No, great question. And absolutely, that's why FEMA requires these plans to have an open engagement and an open public process. So we have a survey, and there's questions we asked in the survey to try to identify what is the perception of risk and where do we have problems. And if you haven't taken the survey, please do so, because that gives us a lot of feedback. The object of the game is to try to attempt to identify projects that reduce risk. And, if our risk analysis isn't telling us exactly where the risk is, that's why it's important that you give us feedback. When, it's unfortunate that, we're in this COVID world and right now we're limited. Normally we would be doing this in an open public forum and we'd have maps on the wall. And hopefully you would all 85 of you would be in this room and we'd have the opportunity to mark up these maps. Well, this is not a floodplain, but I've had 3 floods in 5 years over here, and we mark up the map and we can do that. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that in this current state of time, but we do have tools like this story map, and it is a risk communication tool, and it does have the ability for you to provide us feedback. So things like, hey, why isn't the corner of 3rd and Main shown as a floodplain like we already have? Well, no, but at least we can point locate that. We put a dot on the map that there's a problem here. And if we get 30 dots on the map in that area, that identifies a need. Maybe we need to do a study in this neighborhood to determine what the cause of the urban drainage flood problem is. Or what is the best practice for wildfire vegetation management in this area of the county. It is a lot of biofeedback. We can use the science only so far. And so that's why we really want to make this a continuing public involvement process. One of the best things we can ask of you as John Q. citizen is to capture perishable data when things happen. Things like as simple as a high water mark. A high water mark can tell us a lot about flood risk. And if everybody that is impacted by flood would just take the 1 minute or 2 minutes it takes to either put a pencil line where the high water was, or put a stake in a tree or something, and then notify the county that you've recorded that. If all of a sudden we got a repository of high water marks and we are able to plot these where areas outside of FEMA has mapped, we know we can create a depth grid off of that. We have the technology. We have such good elevation models that we can measure depths above ground and create really good flood extent and location data. Where the fires occurred, fire perimeter data, where there's landslides, where are we seeing debris flows? That's data. And that helps us really get our arms around where are the problems. We thoroughly are not saying this is the full extent of the risk. What we're saying is this is the extent of the risk based on the data that we have. And so hopefully this becomes a platform. And one of the advancements of this tool, when it, as we evolve, and once again, this is a legacy project. It's gonna have legacy. Once we're done with the plan, it's still gonna be here. It's gonna have platforms where you can report problems. You'll be able to go into this hazard mapper and drop a point on a location, and up will pop a screen and it'll say, hey, I had a flood here yesterday and the water was 6 inches above the ground. And boom, now we've got a data capture point where we can capture that data and actually inform future updates of this process. So, great question. I'm glad it's asked. Once again, we're not saying what this is what's going to happen. We're saying it's what could happen. And it's a starting point. and hopefully it evolves and we get a better understanding of risk as we move through the process.
I'm going to have you answer one more question and then move back to the story map, and then we'll do another Q&A session. So I saw a question, did I see a 1% hazard risk from Russian River flooding? Seems like it floods here every 2 to 3 years. So that may speak to the local knowledge and the identifying and, you know, marking when those things happen and providing to the county. But Rob, perhaps you can state that more articulately.
Yeah, the reason why we use the 1% or the 100-year is that is what's referred to as the regulatory flood. So when FEMA generates its map, it will map what's called the 100-year floodplain, and that is where regulations are required, where the county is required to regulate new development, and in some cases, that's where insurance is required. But FEMA also maps more frequent, lesser depth flood events, like the 5, the 10, the 50, or the 100-year. We have all of those, but it would just be so many layers to put on this map that it would be, you know, it would be really confusing. Bottom line is we are assessing risk to the lesser events, and we do acknowledge and know that especially on the Russian River, that events are happen all the time. And so that's why we have repetitive loss along the Russian River. And so that 100-year is just one of the benchmarks, right? I mean, FEMA maps the 2, 5, 10, 100, 500, and in some cases they'll map the 1,000-year event. And we have all that data. It's just, you know, in a risk communication tool, this is where flood insurance is going to be required. This is where it's going to be required to be regulated. And this is the ones that most people are being impacted by. These lesser events are not regulated floodplains, and unless they're within the 100, which a lot of times they are. But you know, this really kind of represents kind of the maximum extent.
Closing the Q&A for a moment, and Cindy, I will let you get back to describing your beautiful work.
Well, luckily, you know, I just am the messenger of everybody else's hard work putting all this data together. But luckily for everybody, I don't really have too much more to cover. I did just want to show you all a different approach. So if you did want to find like a hazard, create a hazard report for a bigger area than just an address, or you don't really have your address, but you know a point you want to drop it, you could come and draw. Instead of putting a place name, you can just come and draw. And, you know, if you wanted a point and said, I want to see, you know, what's going on there, you can create your hazard report. Or you could come and you could actually draw a polygon. So you could come and you could say, okay, I want to know. You click. I think so. Okay, I'm clicking. I swear it works, guys. Let me start over. I think that's the problem. Okay, here we go. I think. All right, I'm not going to draw a polygon. I'm going to draw a circle. There we go. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's just a delay with the technology right now. So as you see, right, it's a pretty large area. And then you can come into this hazard report. And there's potential when I click this hazard report, it might spin, because when you get the larger area, it's aggregating all those hazard layers that you saw. So it might take a little bit, but we'll see. So just for any of you, as you're out there using the tool, if you do pick on like a really large area, it might spin to the point that it gets stuck. So if that's the case, you know, maybe try to minimize your polygon or your circle area, and you'll have to like hit your refresh browser sometimes if it just keeps spinning and spinning. But so what it's doing is just reading that data is all. So that's really the biggest next step, and other than adding your address, is that you can add a point, you could add, you know, a shape or anything that you wanted to get to this hazard report. And I think, you know, it's not overly intuitive sometimes with this hazard data, because it's a built-in tool with an Esri product, so it's not a customized product. See, so it says it's come responsive, not being responsive, and I'm just going to tell it to wait for a minute. But as you go through, you know, you get stuck a little bit. We do have, I'll go to this while that's waiting. Actually, I think I am going to go ahead and refresh my browser. So pretty simple if that happens to you. You're not alone by any means. It's just the nature of tool limitations sometimes. But if you come here, it'll take you to a link as well that does have like step-by-step. You know, you can go and have the pop-up window and it shows you how to draw. And, you know, you come down here and do your draw. And then we do have a little bit of an interpretation of what the data means as well. And an example hazard report map. So, if this is lacking and you want more explanation, you know, just reach out and let us know, and we can augment these instructions to help make sure that you're able to use the tool well and navigate well. And so that's, you know, that's really the bulk of this presentation is really just walking you through how to, you know, how to click on the dynamic interactive tools and understand why the data is there and what it is and what it's being used for. And I think really the next steps in this is, you know, through the questions you guys have already addressed, like how are you identifying mitigation projects and what are they associated with? Well, you know, really you use this results of this hazard assessment to identify, okay, what's your greatest risk? You know, where are you most vulnerable to hazard exposure? Have you identified, you know, different ways to address that and reduce that risk and the impacts, and identify different mitigation projects? And so as the steering committee comes together, you know, they've identified their missions, they've identified their goals, they've identified their objectives, and now they're going to really get together as an advisory body and look at this hazard data and look at the community input to say, you know, do we have it right? And then how do we start identifying realistic, feasible projects that have the resources, that we know where the grant opportunities are. And if we don't, then we need to define it and we need to seek that information. And then that becomes the mitigation actions associated with this hazard mitigation plan. And again, they continuously get cross-checked to say, are they supporting your mission? Are they supporting your goals? Are they supporting your objectives? And, you know, ultimately, are they reducing risk? So with that, I'm going to button up my presentation, and I can answer any questions on the plan tool, or anybody on the team can help answer any questions on the process. But thank you.
Thank you. That's terrific, and it's exciting to see this tool take shape. I have a question from Shannon about which dam breach scenario is represented.
All right, I'm going to go back to the hazards. It's a combined list. So if you go to the dam failure tab, you're able to see all the different breaches that were analyzed. So it's this entire list. And then it's a combined, this area represents the combination of all of those different dam breaches. Does that help answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
There is a question, and I believe Caroleon Safford is on the line. Caroleon, do you see the question about fire prevention and vegetation management reports? There's a question
Sorry, I haven't seen it.
As PRMD fire prevention inspectors begin going out in the field and performing vegetation management assessment reports, will that information be used to update hazard maps?
No, the inspection reports don't have not been used to update the hazard, because what we're looking at there is only the 100-foot near home areas. So no.
It's a different set of information that you're collecting when the inspectors are out in the field versus the aggregate of information to create these hazard maps. Is that an accurate?
That is accurate, and it's a moving target as people get inspected over and over, those compliance rates tend to change and go up over time.
Let's see if there's any, if you have any other questions, people, panelists, I'm happy to help get you an answer if we have an answer. The wildfire hazard information is up here. Rob or someone else from the mapping team, what is our anticipation on when this information will be made? You know, we'll move from preliminary to final. I know there's been some conversations and maybe it will not happen within this phase. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because the data is so new.
Yeah, as far as the risk assessment, okay, we're required to do two things in the risk assessment. We're supposed to assess exposure, okay, what is exposed, and then we're also supposed to assess the vulnerability. And you know, the old adage, just because you're exposed does not mean you're vulnerable, or your degree of vulnerability can vary based upon things like codes and standards. So I always like to use the floodplain as an example. If I have a house that's at grade and my flood depth's 5 feet, I'm way more vulnerable than a house that's 6 feet in the air. And so that is what we call the vulnerability aspect, where we try to estimate vulnerability of the general building stock. So that's the one element of this tool that's not reflected, is our loss estimation. And we will have our loss estimation done here probably in the next 30 days. That's going to inform the final risk ranking for each of our entities. And so once we have loss estimation, then you'll see dashboards in here that will say, okay, here's the exposure, here's the estimated loss to that exposure based upon our scenario earthquakes, our scenario floods, et cetera. So, you know, once again, this is a work in progress and it will evolve. At some point in time, we'll have a dashboard on here that talks about what types of mitigation actions were identified by each planning partner. I see this tool being evolved to, you know, one of the elements we're going to be doing is annual progress reporting on the successes of the plan. So Lisa, when you apply for a grant and you get it, we're going to say hooray, and where's the project reach of that grant, and actually put it on this map. So, I mean, it really is meant to be a communication tool, and it will, so there will be, so hopefully, you know, keep coming back. I mean, there's going to be new bells and whistles. When we do our next round, we will be doing another round of public outreach. When we have the draft plan, we will present the draft plan during a public comment period, and we'll do another public meeting like this. This tool will be updated, and we'll show you what enhancements have been made to the tool then. And you know, yeah, please keep checking it out. Please use it. You know, tell your neighbors. I mean, we have 86 people on the phone on this call today. There's 400,000 people in Sonoma County. Hopefully 400,000 people in Sonoma County know that this tool is available and go and use it, because it's got a lot of information in it. There was a question on here too I saw about the dam failure data, Lisa, about, you know, typically modeled for breaches.
Yes.
What we are using is the dam inundation mapping that's required under the state requirements for high hazard dams for EAPs, emergency action planning, and that is what's called the probable maximum flood, or PMF. So that's maximum impoundment. There's two scenarios, daylight scenario and rainy day scenario. We took the maximum of both. And it's data that is now publicly available on the state DSOD website. So all the data that we're using is what's been produced by California Dam Safety Office, and it is what is referred to as the PMF, probable maximum flood.
The geodemographic data, there's a question about, you know, underserved communities, and it's my understanding that sort of demographic data is not going to be provided as a layer, but how does FEMA view this, or the planning for this sort of information?
Yeah, great question. And yes, social equity, equity lensing, social vulnerability, environmental justice, whatever you want to call it, they're all the same thing. Expanding the look at beyond just buildings. It's taking a better look at who's in those buildings, who uses those buildings, and what's their demographic demographic profile. First off, right now, it is not a requirement. So we don't have to do that. When I say a requirement by FEMA to get this plan approved, but that doesn't mean it's not important. The problem we have is the social demographic data that's being produced at the federal level, which is basically the US Census Department, is extremely, it's not granular, it's very coarse data. And it's at a census block or a census tract level. And the problem we have is our risk assessment is very detailed. It's what we call point-based. So we've recreated every structure in the county and in our models, and we have up to 30 data attributes for every structure. When it was built, foundation type, what's a roof type, what's the whatever. What we don't know is what is the demographic profile of the occupants of those buildings. And if you try to take extremely granular data, point-based data, and overlay it on coarse data like a census block or a census tract, it tells you nothing. So we can do layers of analysis for exposure when we're just comparing a tract to a tract or a block to a block. But what we can't do is we can't adjust our damage curves or our fragility curves, so we don't even attempt to. So when this next set of data comes out and it says loss and vulnerability, it's not going to make any attempt to adjust those vulnerability assessments based upon the social demographics. Right now, there is currently no standard to address the standard generic core damage curves for social demographics. But we could take this data, and FEMA now has what they call their national risk index, and they produce this data at the census tract level across the country, and we can get that data. Once again, it's very coarse, and keep in mind when you're sitting there looking at a census tract, it's not, you can't get any granular look. It's taking the entire area and saying what is the average demographic of that tract. In some cases, especially when you look at this data for the Bay Area, it's almost comical. Everything is one color. There's very little variability. So we're very data limited on that. Now, I know that data may exist at the local level, but we need to be able to layer it and be able to show it. The beauty of it is the tool is here, Lisa, and if the county and its planning partners decide, oh, we now have this demographic layer that we can throw in, is exposure, no problem. You can throw that layer and you could turn that demographic layer on, people of color, low to moderate income, non-English speaking. I mean, there's all these layers, and you could turn that layer on and hopefully it has the granularity to match with the base data. But if it doesn't, it's not going to tell you nothing. And so I definitely think we need to identify that as an action in the plan to, seek ways to gain better data on social vulnerability. And but we right now are really limited in the space of mitigation planning, where we have to do point-based vulnerability assessments, looking at buildings, infrastructure, and critical facilities to be able to put a social demographic layer on that.
Will satellite and topo layers be added to the map tool?
Okay, so Cindy, what about the imagery? Do we have imagery?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question. It can be added. The one thing the caveat is to make sure you don't overload your tools so they don't load anymore. So that's just one thing, because both of those layers are really data intense. But certainly one thing we can easily do is we can turn on base map options on every single map. So then you've got the ability, the user has the ability to change the base map. So you could look at the satellite imagery that is automatically loaded through the Esri software, and also the topo layers. So it's definitely, I defer the answer as far as if we're going to add specific Sonoma County data, but we can add a base map and you can change that as easy as you want on every map.
Yeah, we don't want to make the tool non-functional. And while I think imagery is important, where you can see a structure or a building we do have footprint data in there. You'll notice that you'll see the building footprints, but the actual imagery is valuable, but it is a very big data set. I will tell you that the terrain models that we are using for all our modeling is very, very high resolution. It's what's based on what's called LiDAR, light imaging and detection and ranging. And it's what we call survey grade. I think it's 3 meter, which is, that's within plus or minus within 6 inches. We have the data. But if you turned on that digital elevation model into this tool to show that terrain where you could put a point on anywhere and get a data elevation, it would never run. I mean, it eats up a lot of data. So, know that that data does exist, and it's at the county and it's available and it can be used. It's just, I think at a public viewer, it's probably not feasible to show the terrain model. Now, turning on contours, I'd rather have the terrain model, the LiDAR data, than a contour, especially if it's like a USGS contour that's got a 20-foot difference between each line. But to be able to see topography, where there's a steep slope or not, that's what you call a digital terrain model. And so Lisa, Cindy's showing you the layers that are available. So Cindy, I mean, maybe that's something we can talk to Shelley about. Future iterations of this is to turn on an image or to turn on a terrain model.
So the LiDAR, it can be overlaying as a layer.
Yeah.
LiDAR.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's terabytes of data, and
Yeah.
it takes a long. I don't know if you've ever seen a PDF. If you've seen some of the PDF maps and you try to open that PDF, it just sits there and spins because it's literally bringing in those pixels. You'd see the same thing in this platform because it's so data intensive. But rest assured, we have very high resolution terrain model data, and the beauty of that is we've created all our flood data has created depth grids off of that terrain data. So the depth inundation data that we have is very high resolution. So when we get to our risk analysis for the floodplains that we have got maps on, it's going to be very accurate and based on that data.
So as we're entering the last 15 minutes of our meeting, I want to make sure I capture all the questions, but also would like you to speak to the timeline and what the timeline is from now, what we're going to be doing in the next few months until final adoption and the next opportunity for the public to review and comment.
Yeah, Cindy, can you throw up that graphic that had that one right there? Yeah. So, phase 1, 2, and 3 are linear. They're parallel actions. They're all going at the same time, and they go from the start to the finish. Our phase 4 is done. We have our goals and objectives. We are still finalizing the planned maintenance strategy, and the plan is been assembled. We had a framework from the start, and as we complete things, we've been hanging the meat on the bones, for lack of a better term. So I'd say we're about the 75% milestone. So our target goal for submittal of the plan to Cal OES, who this plan has to go to them first. They review and approve it. Once they review and approve it, they send it on to FEMA. Our goal is to submit the plan to Cal OES no later than June 30. To do that, we still have to finalize the plan, which means all our jurisdictional partners have to complete their action plans, and that's our next step. We are now moving into the action planning phase. We have to run a minimum 2-week public comment period. And when I say a minimum, that's the minimum the FEMA requires. We are likely to expand that for some other reasons, maybe 30 days, where we will have a public review period where people can review and comment on the draft plan. If we work backwards from the 30th, that puts us into May. And so we can anticipate some sort of public comment period, probably around mid-May, where we will now re-engage the public, present the draft plan. What did we find? What actions have we identified? What categories of actions have we identified? How many? What's the avenue? What do they look like? And so that next round of opportunity for public comment will be during that public comment period when we present the draft plan. But I will tell you, we're open to public comment 24/7 right now. There's a link on the website. We now have the story map, which is live. There's multiple points where you can ask questions, provide us feedback, and we ask you to do so, please. So don't wait for the next step. If you've got issues or things that you think we need to address, we'll be glad to get input on that. So that's the game plan. I would say we're looking mid-May to be doing our final round of public comment, submit the plan. FEMA and the state each take up to 45 days to do the review. So we're looking 90 days post-submittal. We're going to submit the plan before it's adopted. FEMA wants to see it before it's adopted. So if they require any changes, they can make it and not have to have anybody re-adopt. So they issue what's called approval pending adoption. So we would anticipate getting that about 90 days following June 30. So that puts us around September. And that's when all the partners have to adopt. FEMA won't issue final approval on the plan until it's adopted by everybody. And so then the county has to go through its adoption process. All the cities, all the districts have to go through their adoption process. And then we provide the proof of adoption to FEMA, and then they issue final approval. And so my hope is that we can have final approval of this plan by early October, because the next round of grants are going to be coming up in that September through December timeframe. And we want to make sure everybody's eligible to go apply for those grants. So that's kind of the timeline for the next steps.
Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for participating. I encourage you to submit any questions to the project website that Dominica has provided in the chat. We still have a few more minutes. I would also ask, if any feedback regarding this meeting, how helpful it was, things that we could improve upon. I'm always looking to ways to get the message out to people better. So your feedback on both this story map, the planning, the public meeting, and the process is encouraged at the project website. Let's see if there's any more questions. How many jurisdictions are participating? Off the top of my head, I think there's 15. Let's see if I am right.
Yeah. Yes, Cindy,
Doing
you know the
math in
answer to
my
that. Come on.
Sorry.
While we're trying to find out that answer, I will tell you that not all cities are participating in this, because some of the cities already have their own plan. So like Petaluma, Healdsburg, Sonoma Water Agency, they have their own plans, and so they chose to stay, and that's fine. There's no requirement that you have to do that.
We are coordinating with them, though. That doesn't mean that
Yes.
just because they're not participating as a direct partner doesn't mean that we are not coordinating or discussing, how we can make sure that our mitigation actions are, don't necessarily see plan boundaries to the extent.
Yeah, and you'll notice
possible.
that you'll notice in the story map, we have risk assessment data for all the cities, even those that aren't participating. So we, like Lisa said, yes, we are fully coordinating with those and integrating, where feasible and possible, especially like with agencies like Sonoma Water, which are a very large stakeholder. So did you find the answer on how many, Cindy?
Well, so we've got 12 down here, and that's not including Sonoma County. It's the county as a whole. So it's 13 that's listed on our planning partners page. And a lot of those are different fire districts that are participating.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's majority is districts. We have more districts than we do municipalities. So, and the good news is all the municipalities that are, if they're not participating in this effort, they have their own plan. So everybody's going to be covered. There's nobody in Sonoma County that doesn't have coverage under a plan.
I wanted to address some of the questions. So CAL FIRE is definitely a partner. While they're not developing a jurisdiction because they are a state entity, they're definitely a partner all the way through this process. And I did want to thank Chief Nichols for participating in all the steering committee meetings and for his work, with Sonoma County. Whether the cities are also holding public meetings or hearings, my assumption is yes, in separate ways. This presentation and this story map and the adoption of their annexes is they're in their hands. But I think they are going to be doing similar meetings. And yes, I will send a link to this presentation to everyone who participated. We will also have the YouTube video on the project website. Let's see. Does the hazard mitigation plan consider larger storm events causing soil erosion that takes out roads? This is beyond my.
Yes. That'll be the
Yes.
landslide mass movement chapter, and it will include discussion on debris flows, and it looks at slopes and denatured slopes and soils, and it is highly emphasizing on roads. So that's going to be the major part of our exposure analysis for landslides and mass movements.
And the climate change, and I know that is top of mind for a lot of people. So maybe I'm repeating, how much climate change information will be included, and so many of our hazards and route. Sorry if I'm paraphrasing, like wildfire or sea level rise are increased or intensified by climate change. So how is that being captured?
There could be a whole chapter all by itself called
Yeah.
called climate change, and in each subsection of that chapter will be a discussion on each of the primary hazards of concern. And basically we are going to say either quantitatively or qualitatively what we anticipate the change to that hazard could be triggered by climate change. So for example, flood, we'll make the statement, just like the 500-year floodplain today could be the 100-year floodplain in 30 years. And that the hydrograph is changing. We can validate that by rainfall indices, but plain and simple fact is we can't model it. There's no real set standard for how to model that yet. We talk about sea level rise, we talk about wildfire, and all of those. We'll talk about how we think based upon the data we have now, and in some of them it'll be quantitative, and in others it'll be a qualitative discussion that says what do we project, and climate change will be addressed by this plan. It'll be very blatantly obvious. And I will tell you now, FEMA is allowing us to count as a benefit future conditions, which when I say a benefit in grant applications, you have to do a thing called a benefit cost analysis. And when we did those analyses, 2 years ago, we could not project, we could not count future impacts. Now we can. So the pendulum is swinging. The programs are reacting to, and FEMA is providing funding for projects that will clearly mitigate the impacts from climate change. And so we will do the best we can to address a very important and complicated subject.
Thanks. Chris Godley, are you still on the line? There's a question about public communications before and during disasters. Well, it's not part of this plan. I'm wondering if you're still on the line, if you could speak to that. And if you're not on the line, sorry for calling you out.
Chris, you're on mute. If you heard that, you are on mute.
And if you're not, I will get back to you, Phil, on your question. And Rue had a question about saline intrusion and groundwater. My hunch is that is not part of this plan, but it would be part of a plan that perhaps Sonoma Water or the Regional Water Board is doing. But Rob, maybe you can confirm that.
Yeah, right now I'm not. It would be a secondary impact to something, either sea level rise or I guess it could be maybe under our mass movement discussion. But right now there's no game plan to talk about groundwater intrusion, saltwater intrusion. I know like Sonoma County Water is probably looking at that because of their water supply, like you said, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
I know that was brought up, and we're doing the plan for Marin County, Marin Municipal Water, and that's something that they're looking at. So for us, no, not at this time.
Okay, I think we are about at time, and I want to make sure that we close, in at 5, depending on what time zone you're in. So Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Thank you everyone for participating, and thank you to Tetra Tech for your extremely hard work and putting this information together in a way that I think everyone is understandable, it's accessible, and really appreciate it. So if anyone has any questions, please email the project website, the project email, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. And if I don't have the answer, I will let you know that, and I will either find the answer or we will make sure that somehow it is captured. So thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the participants. I hope everyone has a good evening and enjoy the beautiful, what we have left of the day for those in California. I don't know. And have a good evening. Good night.